Ethics in public speaking. Is there such a thing? This is Dr. Lucas's chapter 2 in the art of public speaking. And I want to share with you about ethics and public speaking. Now, it's not a new phenomena, but people think that the speeches that we're hearing today are unethical and that ethics and public speaking is kind of like an oxymoron. It is definitely not. You can definitely be an ethical public speaker. When you're thinking about public speaking, ethics deals with issues of right and wrong in human affairs. Ethical decisions are weighing potential courses of action against ethical standards. Where do we get these ethical standards, though? That's the next question. So, guidelines for ethical speaking. Making ethically sound goals, being fully prepared, being honest, avoiding name-calling or abusive language, and putting principles into practice. Most definitely, you want to follow some of these guidelines for public speaking. So, where did you learn how to be ethical? In my studies of child, youth, and family studies and communication, I discovered that ethics in public speaking really come from your personal beliefs, your personal background, things that you learned growing up from your parents, other adults around you, other teens around you, other children, people who were part of your community. This is where we learned to determine what is an ethically sound goal. We definitely don't want to use name calling, using language to defame, demean, degrade individuals or groups. In other words, you don't want to come out into your speech and go, "Hey, buttheads, idiots, come on, why don't you understand what I'm talking about?" Now, of course, those are some mild examples. There are other examples of name calling which are even worse. Things that I am not going to mention here as this video is public. But if you think about them, I'm sure that you've heard of some of them before, and some you may not even realize is calling names. If you're going to use a word, if you're going to call people things, make sure that you look up the word. If it's colloquial, if it is something that you use for slang or jargon, or it's part of your growing up, make sure that it's something that is acceptable to everyone. Plagiarism is the next thing we need to talk about. It is presenting language and or the ideas of others as your own. In public speaking, this means not only providing a bibliography or a works cited or references page if your instructor requests it, but it also means saying that out loud. As you've noticed, whenever I've done these videos, I have always acknowledged that the PowerPoint that I'm using is the material from Dr. Stephen Lucas's book. I do that to avoid being cited for plagiarism. I have studied public speaking. I have taught public speaking for 20 years, but this is still Dr. Lucas's material. It is cited here in writing, but I also want to make sure that I say it out loud so that you all know that the materials come from somewhere else. So there are a couple of different types of plagiarism. I'm not sure if you even knew that. Plagiarism is a hard word to spell. Plagiarism is sometimes a hard word to say if you have to say it 10 times fast or 10 times in a row like I have. But it also comes in a couple of different types. First, there is global plagiarism. Then there's patchwork plagiarism. And then incremental plagiarism. First, global plagiarism is stealing from a single source and passing it off as one's own. So, if you were one of those people who decided you were going to take your speech, the speech maybe that your college roommate did last semester, and you're going to pass it off as your own, that's considered global plagiarism. hopefully your teachers, your faculty members, your TAs, whoever is teaching your public speaking class will know you well enough to know if the materials you are presenting are your own. But that's not always true. So try to be ethical, especially outside of the classroom, but inside of the classroom, it is also important. Outside of the classroom, it is definitely a problem. In fact, probably 10 years ago or so, there was a professor from the University of Colorado who actually got in trouble for stealing work from a scholar out of Canada and passing it off as his own. As if with today's technology, we wouldn't know that he took the materials from someone else. Don't do it. Don't try to do it. We have plenty of ways to figure that out. Then there's patchwork plagiarism. And this is stealing ideas, language, and more from 2 or 3 sources and then trying to pass it off as your own. So here is patchwork plagiarism is taking like part of this speech from this person, part of this speech from this person, and part of this speech from this person, and weaving it together as if it were your own speech. But it's really not, especially if you don't cite the materials that you've used from somewhere other than your own ideas and your own knowledge. The last one is what we see most often, and this is called incremental plagiarism. This is failing to give credit for parts borrowed from other sources. In other words, you have taken a quotation from a newspaper, you have looked something up on a website, you have found something in a journal, and you use it in your speech, which is totally acceptable, except that you have to tell us where it came from. Otherwise, it is considered incremental plagiarism. So, now that we have today internet and information at our fingertips, which, believe it or not, hasn't always been that way, but when we have access to all of this information on the internet, we need to make sure that we cite our sources when we are using the internet materials and take careful notes. Treat it as if you were taking notes from a physical document. Treat it as if you were taking notes from a book, from a newspaper, from a magazine, from a journal, the physical copy. Although all those things, of course, are available at our fingertips on the internet, whether it's on our phone, our computers, our tablets, our iPods, our iPads, you name it, it's available to us. So we need to take careful notes and then summarize the materials or write direct quotations and attribute those to the people who have provided that information. Not only does public speaking require speakers to be ethical, but it also requires listeners to be ethical. Now, you know, people who are a part of a conversation and they go, uh-huh, yeah, uh-huh, while the other person is speaking, only they aren't actually listening. So they're really acknowledging ideas and agreeing with something or saying something in response to what the speaker has just said when it doesn't even make sense in the conversation. So when you are being an ethical listener in, say, a public speaking class or in any sort of audience, remember that speech making is a two-way street. In fact, when I talk about listening later, I might remind you that listening is probably more important than speaking. If there's nobody listening, what's the point in your speaking? Right? So, listeners have ethical obligations. And although Dr. Lucas does not tell you here what those ethical obligations are, I'm sure he explains it a little bit clearer in his textbook. But let's think about, what does it mean to be an ethical listener? It means to evaluate ideas, not to just shut down if the speaker says something we don't automatically agree with, and to pay attention, take notes, even if it's just mental notes, so that you can respond appropriately and provide appropriate feedback to the speaker, and be an active participant as a member of the audience. Ethics and public speaking is not an oxymoron. You can actually be an ethical public speaker.